Hi, my name is Zephan. The night I lost my job, I didn't scream. I didn't tell them about the tech company I secretly owned, or the beachfront house they'd never set foot in. My father, the man who was supposed to build me up, called me a failure and threw me out of the empire he inherited. My wife, the woman who vowed to stand by me, spit in my face and walked out with her new lover. They thought I was finished. But I didn't yell. I didn't fight. I just disappeared. And when I returned, I wasn't the same man. Now I wonder if they'd known who I really was that night. Would they have dared to try and destroy me? Or was their betrayal always inevitable? This is the story of how silence became my sharpest weapon, and how my own family couldn't escape what came next. The thunder had been grumbling over Charleston since late afternoon. By the time I pulled my modest sedan into the long manicured driveway, the air was thick, wet, and heavy. The kind of oppressive heat that settles on your skin and stays there like a judgment. Spanish moss dripped from the ancient oak trees, their branches like skeletal fingers pointing toward the house. The family's brick estate looked the same as always, pristine, symmetrical, and painfully hollow. It was a monument to success, not a home. Inside, the dining room glowed with candlelight, and the long mahogany table was already full. Everyone was in their designated place, a perfect tableau of power. My father, Patrick, sat at the head, a king on his throne. At his right hand was my brother, Colby, smug as ever, basking in the reflected glory. Across from him sat my wife, Amara, stunning in a silk dress that seemed out of place for a woman who claimed she'd just been running errands. No one looked up when I entered. It was like stepping onto a stage mid-scene only to realize you were no longer part of the cast. I gave a silent nod and took my seat at the far end of the table, the seat of the afterthought. The smell of rosemary lamb filled the room, a rich scent that couldn't cover the stench of tension. Silver clinked against porcelain. Conversations hummed around me, a symphony of topics I was excluded from. Company expansions, quarterly reports, Colby's new lakeside project. I was invisible. Then, my father cleared his throat. The low hum of conversation ceased instantly. "Before dessert," he said, setting down his wine glass with a deliberate click, "we have a matter of business to address." I felt it before he spoke it, a cold dread that started in my gut and spread through my veins. Something in his voice was too calm, too rehearsed. "As of this afternoon," he announced to the room, though his eyes were fixed on me, "the board and I have come to a unanimous decision. Zephan, your role at Harper & Sons has been terminated." My fork paused mid-air, a piece of asparagus hovering inches from my lips. The world seemed to slow down. "We wish you well in whatever future endeavors you pursue," he added. His tone is detached, as if he were cutting loose a bad investment. His words were cold, efficient, clinical. Colby didn't even pretend to be solemn. He leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing on his lips. "Some people just aren't built for the pressure, Dad." The air shifted. I looked around the table searching for an ally, a flicker of protest. Nothing. My mother busied herself slicing into her creme brulee, the crack of the sugar shell unnervingly loud in the sudden silence. My jaw tightened. Then came the second blow. Amara stood, her chair scraping loudly against the polished wood floor. In one fluid motion, she reached into her designer handbag and tossed a manila envelope onto my plate. Lamb sauce stained the corner. "Divorce papers," she said, her voice flat and devoid of emotion. "I'm leaving tonight, with someone who actually has a future." My chest went still. There was no anger, no pleading, just a strange, chilling clarity. She looked at me the way you look at a pair of worn-out shoes, once useful, now just in the way. She leaned down, her voice a venomous whisper meant only for me. "You've always been a loser, Zephan. At least now, it's official." Colby chuckled. My father just nodded, a silent confirmation. They expected me to shout, to beg, to break. But I didn't. I calmly reached for my keys, the old beat-up keychain dangling from them, the one Amara once laughed at. The leather was frayed at the edges. I stood slowly, carefully, as if trying not to shatter something fragile inside me. I looked at each of them, one by one, meeting their cold stares. "Thank you," I said softly, my voice even, for the clarity. I tucked the keys into my pocket. You won't be hearing from me again. No one stopped me. No one followed as I walked out into the humid night air. The sky cracked open above me, thunder breaking through like a war drum, and then the rain came, a torrential downpour. By the time I reached my car, I was soaked to the bone, but I didn't mind. It felt like a cleansing. I drove aimlessly at first, through the older parts of town, past crumbling cobblestones and shuttered porches. Somewhere between Broad Street and the Ravenel Bridge, I pulled over at an overlook. Tonight, it was empty. Just me, the city lights shimmering in the distance, and the relentless sound of rain on the windshield. I reached over to my worn leather briefcase, popped the latches, and slid open a false bottom. Inside, perfectly dry and untouched, were two things: a notarized set of incorporation documents and a flash drive labeled Vantage. Trust docs. For years I had worked in silence, while Colby strutted around boardrooms taking credit for my ideas, and Amara posted about her charity brunches. I was bothered to know who I really was. I closed the briefcase, the soft click echoing in the stillness. I took the broken keychain from my pocket, rubbed the worn leather between my fingers, and tossed it onto the passenger seat. Then I turned the ignition and drove straight into the heart of the storm. The storm had softened to a lingering drizzle by the time I reached Sullivan's Island. I turned down a quiet, unmarked road that didn't show up on GPS, the kind of place you only found if you were meant to. When my headlights caught the low brick pillars of an iron gate, I keyed in the code. The driveway curved through thick seagrass, opening to a modern, minimalist beach house nestled behind the dunes. Clean lines, wide glass windows facing the Atlantic, and absolute privacy. This house had been mine for 8 years, purchased with the profits from my first quiet tech venture. I never told my father, never told Colby, not even Amara. It was my secret, my sanctuary. The house welcomed me with silence, no framed photos, no clutter, just smooth concrete floors, white walls, and the smell of the ocean. I flipped a switch, and soft amber lights glowed to life. As I stood by the window, watching the tide roll in, I finally let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for years. Then, 2 sharp knocks at the front door. I froze. No one knew this place. When I opened the door, she was already brushing past me. Eva, sharp eyes, no-nonsense walk, and a cardboard tray with 2 coffees. I saw the security alert, she said, kicking off her flats. Figured you'd either end up here or in jail. It's 3 a.m. Perfect time for terrible coffee and uncomfortable conversations, she replied, handing me a cup. We stood in the kitchen, the fireproof folder she'd brought sitting between us on the counter. They gutted me, I said, my voice hoarse. All of them. One clean slice. She nodded slowly. The trust is intact. The house is protected. They can't touch it. You were smart enough to plan for betrayal before it happened, Zephan. That doesn't make you weak. It makes you dangerous. She paused, her eyes locking with mine. They think you've disappeared. Maybe you should let them. Her words lingered long after she left. She was right. They thought I had vanished. For once, I wasn't going to correct them. That night, I powered down my phone and slid it into a drawer next to the broken keychain. By morning, I had disabled all my emails. I wiped my LinkedIn. My social media accounts were deleted. I left one final encrypted message for the 3 colleagues I trusted. I'm okay. Need space. Don't try to reach me. Then I logged off from the world. Going dark wasn't about hiding. It was about taking back control. Family disappointment was scrubbed from existence. My real company was reborn under a new name, run by a loyal team. The only tie to me was an invisible, airtight legal thread. Days later, Eva showed me her screen. It was a business article, casually mentioning Colby Caraway stepping in to lead negotiations for a major municipal tech upgrade. The exact contract I had spent 2 years building. He's trying to run the infrastructure deal, Eva said, raising an eyebrow. Without you? He doesn't even know the system specs. I didn't laugh, but a small, cold smile touched my lips. No, I said. Let him drown in it. There was power in restraint. I had built that deal, but I was done performing for an audience that would never clap. It didn't take long. A week later, Eva showed me a screenshot of a leaked group chat between board members. Fred Tanley. The Helix Tech contract is falling apart. Where's Zeffen's data set? Angela Rowe. I thought Patrick said Zeffen handed everything over. This is a circus. Fred Tanley. This wouldn't have happened under Zeffen. I just sat back, letting the warmth of my coffee mug press into my palms. It wasn't revenge. Not yet. It was confirmation. Colby's scrambling, Eva said. He doesn't realize the core algorithm is held under your personal trust. The license expired last Thursday. And they pulled out this morning, she confirmed, handing me a printed email. Helix Tech was severing all ties, citing leadership inconsistency. Translation: they smelled the rot. That evening, Eva forwarded me a leaked surveillance video from the boardroom. My father, Patrick, slammed his fist on the table, his face purple with rage. You begged me to let you lead, he roared at Colby, and now this company is bleeding out in front of the entire market. Zeffen never told anyone the algorithm was separate, Colby whined. Patrick leaned in, his voice a low snarl. You mean to tell me you let your little brother outsmart you from the grave? I closed the laptop. They were unraveling, not because I fought back, but because I had simply stopped holding them up. My silence was a vacuum, and their own incompetence was rushing in to fill it. A month after I disappeared, headlights curved into my driveway. It was Amara. Her hair was a mess, her eyes swollen. She wasn't wearing makeup. She clutched the bars of the gate. Please, Zeffen, she whispered, her voice trembling. Can we talk? I unlocked the gate and drove her to a quiet diner. She told me her new lover had left her the moment the family's name hit the headlines. Found the old keychain she'd given me years ago. I walked out to the edge of the porch, the wind whipping around me. With both hands, I snapped the cheap metal in two. I watched the pieces tumble over the side, disappearing into the darkness. It wasn't an act of anger, it was an act of mercy. For myself. Eva was waiting for me inside. She placed a thick folder on the table. It didn't contain plans for the future, it contained the past. For years, I had documented everything. A fake audit report signed by my father, wire transfers from our charitable foundation used for a consulting trip to the Bahamas, contractor invoices for work never done, pay stubs for employees exploited under a training program loophole. They didn't just push me out, they had buried me under their rot. It's time, Eva said, her eyes glinting. She logged into an encrypted whistleblower portal. No name, no credit, just the unvarnished, documented truth. She clicked submit. The storm had already landed. They just hadn't heard the thunder yet. 3 hours later, the first flag hit the SEC's internal system. By morning, the headline started to light up. Harper & Sons under federal review. Whistleblower alleges years of fraud, labor abuse. Charitable foundation used for personal gain. The empire was crumbling under the weight of its own lies. Colby tried to host a live Q&A on social media. It lasted 5 minutes before he was flooded with questions about using hurricane relief funds to rent a yacht. He bailed mid-sentence, his face beet red. The video went viral, dubbed with circus music. I watched it all from my study, a silent observer of a controlled demolition. They had poured the gasoline for years. I just lit the match. Just as the media frenzy began to quiet, my phone rang. An unknown number, but the caller ID made my hand freeze. Harold, my grandfather. I hadn't spoken to him since my grandmother's funeral. I answered. "It's time," was all he said, and then he hung up. I knew immediately where to go. I drove to his old, now empty house on the coast. In his study, behind an antique desk, was a drawer with a trick lock. Inside was a thick file labeled in his handwriting, "Contingency, Integrity Clause." I sat down and read it. It was a notarized amendment to the original family trust, created by my grandfather decades ago. It stated that if the family business ever breached three core ethical standards, labor fairness, nonprofit transparency, and financial integrity, control of the majority shares held in trust would automatically revert to a designated heir. The heir, handwritten and initialed on the final page, was me. They had all signed it years ago, thinking it was just boring paperwork to appease the old man. They never read it. When I submitted the whistleblower report, I had unknowingly triggered all three conditions. The clause was active. All this time, I thought I was playing defense. It turned out my grandfather had set the checkmate 20 years ago. 2 days later, the transfer was complete. Quietly, legally, irreversibly. I walked through the heavy glass doors of the corporate office. The boardroom was full. Every eye turned to me. Voices dropped off mid-sentence. Colby's jaw went slack. "What are you doing here?" he stammered. I didn't respond. I walked to the head of the long mahogany table, the chair my father sat in, and placed the thick folder in front of him. Colby flipped it open, his face drained of all color. Patrick leaned in, his expression crumbling from arrogance to disbelief, and finally, to horror. "It's all valid," the company's lawyer said from the end of the table, his voice grim. "The transfer filings were confirmed this morning. The clause was triggered by your own internal ethics violations. The morality clause," I said, finally speaking. My voice was calm, even. "The one Grandpa embedded in the trust. You all signed it. You just didn't read it." Colby shot up from his chair. "This is absurd. You think you can just waltz in here?" I met his gaze, not with anger, but with a profound stillness. "This company doesn't belong to you anymore," I said. "The truth is, it never really did." Silence. The weight of it all finally settled on them. I stood slowly. An assistant I had hired stepped forward and set a polished brass nameplate at the center of the table. The engraving caught the light, glinting like truth carved in stone. I turned and walked toward the door without another word. I could feel their stares on my back, but I didn't look back. That night, I stood barefoot on the back deck of my home, overlooking the moonlit water. A warm breeze rolled off the tide. In my hand was a glass of red wine. There were no phone calls, no emails, no noise, just the hush of the ocean, the creak of old wood beneath my feet, and a silence that no one could ever steal from me again. This silence was mine.